We are at COP28 in Dubai, UAE, and with me is Secretary Tony Loyzaga of the DENR. Secretary Loyzaga, congratulations on the very successful delivery of the country statement this morning.
Thank you very much, Daphne. I think a lot of work went into condensing everything we would like to say in 3 minutes. I think I went a little bit over time, but I think as far as our being able to deliver our messages, we were able to bring that across.
There was a sense of urgency and determination, as you said in your first line.
Yes, I think what really has to reach all of our populations is that there is no time to waste. We have a remaining carbon budget, which is the amount of carbon that can be released into the atmosphere before we hit that 1.5 and have crossed over. And that period is less than 6 years. At this point, if we do not make solid commitments towards emissions reduction and we do not prepare ourselves adequately in terms of adaptation, the consequences will be quite severe, especially on the climate vulnerable countries.
The Philippines is living up to its commitments and sharing also a lot of the lessons that we've learned, technical things as well. What about other countries?
Well, I think everyone is trying to do their share. We cannot speak to their priorities because we understand that the climate crisis impacts countries differently. And I think what's important to understand is there are those that are most vulnerable but are least responsible. And therefore, those are the countries that need the attention and the support and the technical and capacity building as well as the financial resources in order to meet the challenges of the climate crisis.
And that brings us to the Loss and Damage Fund, which was approved in this COP. We're seeing about 726 million commitments so far. And in your speech, you did address that the Philippines is asking to be on the board, a seat on the board,
Yes.
and for the Philippines to host the board in
Yes.
Manila.
Yes.
Would you like to tell us details about that?
Well, what's important to note is that there will be loss and damage fund established, as you said, and that pledges have come in. However, the administration of that fund, the access to that fund, the management of that fund, really will rely on the decisions of a board. And that board needs to be hosted in a country that will give it the legal personality, the privileges and immunities that are needed in order to conduct its business. So these are similar, for example, to the kind of privileges and immunities we've given to the ADB, for example, or to the WHO, which is regionally headquartered with us. So that board will be directly on top of making sure that the climate policies are equitably implemented and that access and responsible use of that fund actually happens.
So just to clarify, because some have probably misunderstood in the beginning what the Philippines' role in Loss and Damage Fund would like to be.
Yes. So what we would like to be is the host of that board. What the agreement is among what they call transitional committee members, those that have been there to study the fund and its establishment, is that there will be an interim institution that will handle the funds themselves. And those funds will be, at this point, temporarily lodged as proposed with the World Bank. Now, the World Bank itself has to consider whether or not it would like to take on this role, because that comes with certain conditions. Not everyone, of course, was in favor of the World Bank being the repository. They were afraid, for example, that certain guidance and guidelines in terms of accessing the fund might not be favorable to them because they aren't members, for example. Now, that decision that the World Bank will have to take in terms of the conditions of its management and temporarily hosting of that fund will have to be made within 6 months. And if it decides that it would not want to take on that responsibility, a new entity or body will have to be decided on.
Okay. Still on climate finance, there are other commitments that were announced here at COP. Notably, we have a US $10 billion commitment from the ADB
Yes.
for the Philippines from 2024 to 2029.
Yes.
And then Canada had just announced an increase in their global fund.
Yes.
of which we hope the Philippines will get a little bit
Yes.
of.
Yes. In fact, well, the ADB has been a great supporter of our energy transition, for example, as well as for adaptation and nature-based solutions. These are among their interests in terms of priorities for the Philippines. For Canada, Canada has been a long-time supporter of our nature-based work, and in fact, we have been able to access. Well, we're about to be able to access from the Global Environment Facility a good deal of funding that comes from the government of Canada. And that Global Environment Facility funding will cut across several projects already. And those projects themselves will involve different departments, not just the DNR, in the Philippines. And so Canada has always been a great supporter. We are working with them, for example, also in looking at climate vulnerable mining areas. They are very conscious about climate risk. And this cuts across biodiversity and other natural resources.
Okay. Secretary, you've had a few bilateral meetings.
Yes.
Any notable announcements from that?
Well, what we've tried to do is reach out to our counterparts, especially on this issue of hosting of the board of the Loss and Damage Fund, but also to identify some key areas of collaboration. We've just finished, of course, a meeting with the UNESCAP, which is the scientific arm of the UN, and we're looking at subjects, for example, that have to do with the early warning system for the region, some climate work, some prevention, disaster prevention work as well. But we've met with the Holy See, as well as with the governments of Palau, the Maldives, Sri Lanka. We have a number of upcoming meetings as well. The US has been also meeting with us, both the government and USAID. We're looking, of course, to see how many like-minded countries we can work with, especially on this issue of how complex the climate crisis is. And hopefully, they will also support us in our bid to host the Loss and Damage Fund Board.
Okay. In keeping with our government's all of society approach, I have seen here in the Philippine Pavilion a collaboration and support among many sectors,
Yes.
private sector, different agencies, the academe, the youth. What are your insights from this kind of experience?
But we've always held that the complexity of climate change requires whole of society. And government in particular is responsible for what I call nexus governance. In other words, we need to be able to work across the departments because climate risk cuts across all the different mandates, but we need to work across all sectors as well. And the sectors are impacted differently, and therefore the response and the prevention must also be different for each of the sectors. I think one of the key points here is that we need to work laterally or horizontally across sectors and departments, but we also need to work vertically, and that means our work is multi-level. And local governments and communities must be at the front line because they are the front lines. Yeah, when we say the last mile, they are the first mile and the last mile. It's those of us that can do the kind of support work that we do that will make them resilient.
Before we go, I would like to know if and when you call the president, what would your call be like from here in COP28?
Well, I would say the work has been challenging. Um, the host government has been wonderful in terms of the way it's been able to support this work. And there's a long road ahead of us. However, the Loss and Damage Fund took about 8 years to actually get on the table. So we're hopeful that there will be other contentious issues that will be settled in this COP that will, of course, spill over into the next COP. But as long as they're there, we know that we can work on them together.
Okay, thank you so much, Secretary,
Thanks,
and
Stephanie.
good luck for the next few days.
Thank you very
Thank you.
much. Thank you.